Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LSE for today's event on decolonizing the global publishing industry. My name is Ram, and I'll be the chair for today's event. And I'm very pleased that we're discussing the potential for decolonization of the global publishing industry. And as members of an academic community, for most of us, the primary output, of course, is the academic text published by academic publishers. And the way I think of it is the eye of the needle through which our work must pass before it reaches the world, right? And my concern is that much of it doesn't even make it to the publishing industry because of the politics of what is world class, what is relevant, what is high quality, and so on and so forth. And the second concern is that what does make it is often out of bounds, and for the majority. So it puts the very purpose of knowledge production into question. So I just wanted to begin with a quote that I remembered from an Indian academic called Gopal Guru, who writes on caste issues. And writing about the academic sector in India, he often used to say that it's comprised of theoretical Brahmins and empirical Dalits. So the people at the top are the ones who do research those at the bottom. And that's the problem, I think, with academia at a global level of who is researching whom. And this colonial structure is at the very heart of the problem. And it seems to me that the role of the academic publishing industry is central to this problem. So I'll stop there. We have very knowledgeable panelists, so I'm very much looking forward to the discussions. This just a couple of announcements to say that this event, of course, has been organized by LSE Firoz Lalji Centre for Africa and the Eden Centre. And it is the first event in a new series addressing emerging debates on decolonization and its consequences for higher education. I think Kojo will put the link in the chat box. But coupled with today's event, the Firoz Lalji Centre for Africa has launched the Decolonisation Hub, which is a platform to address anti-racism and decolonization through collaborating and supporting colleagues across LSE. And the hub is going to host a lot of resources, publications, and updates from the FLCA, LSE, and of course other organizations across the globe. So watch out for that. In terms of the format of the event, each of our panelists will roughly speak for 5 minutes each, and then I will do one round of questions. And after that, if there are enough questions coming in from the audience, then we can directly move on to the Q&A. So I'll quickly introduce the panelists before handing over to our first speaker. So we'll go with first Professor Florence Piron. She's the full professor in Communication and Information Department at Université Laval and founder of a decolonized open access publishing house. She's teaching critical thinking there through multidisciplinary courses on ethics, democracy, living together, founding president of the Science and Common Good Association and of the Science and Knowledge Shop Access Savoirs at Laval University, director of Science and Common Good Publishing. She's interested in the links between university, society, and culture, both as a researcher and as an activist for a more open, inclusive, socially responsible, and the common good. So she's intervened orally and in writing in a wide variety of settings, and she loves to design and run websites and Facebook groups. Our next panelist is my colleague in the media department, Dr. Simi Dosicon. She's the assistant professor at LSE and editorial board member of Feminist Africa. Her research centers African women to explore questions of gender, race, subjectivity, and power in a global context. She's the author of a new book which has just been released of Fashioning Post-Feminism, Spectacular Femininity and Transnational Culture. And she's also co-editor of African Luxury, Aesthetics and Politics. Her work has appeared in journals such as Feminist Media Studies, Feminism and Psychology, Qualitative Inquiry, and Feminist Africa, among many others. After that, we will have Dr. Godwin Sundu, who's at the University of Nairobi and is the editor, founding co-editor of the Eastern African Literary and Cultural Studies, which is a Taylor and Francis journal that focuses on literary and cultural trends in Eastern Africa, specifically and to an extent Africa at large. Currently, he's a senior lecturer of literature at University of Nairobi, Kenya, where he teaches minority and post-colonial literatures. And finally, we have Elizabeth Walker, who's global head of portfolio for area studies journals at the publisher Taylor and Francis. And she's responsible for the team to develop African studies, Asian studies, European and East European studies, Latin American and Hispanic studies, and Middle Eastern studies journals. Her own background is in the humanities and social sciences, specifically modern languages, and she's worked in the academic publishing industry for 15 years in a range of roles focused on research monographs, textbooks, and online materials, as well as academic journals. So that's the fantastic panel we have today, and I'll hand it over to Professor Florence. Over to you, Florence. Florence, you're on mute. Sorry.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you. So you will recognize my accent. I am a French-speaking present to you whereas I have established a publishing house disciplinary. We publish books by authors from Canada, Francophone Africa, Haiti, Francophone Europe, mainly in French. But we have also published bilingual books in Haitian Creole and French, or more recently, Fulani and French, as well as books in English and in Spanish. Our little publishing house has also done a very ambitious project. 2 years ago, we have created 12 open access Francophone African journals in a platform, a commons, we think of it as a common, called Grenier des Savoirs, Knowledge Granary. And all the journals share their editorial policies and the secretariat. And we have published 5 issues since the beginning, and a lot more are now in working. For our books and our journals, if authors are not native French speaker, we ask for a translation of each, well, either book introduction or the bio or the abstract in their own language. For example, in Jula, Moré, Bambara, African languages. It's not easy, but we do it. So for us, decolonial publishing means that we encourage experimental writing, meaning more personal or self-reflexive writing. We encourage new topics based on African or Haitian context. For example, we will publish a special issue of a journal on informal public transport in African cities. We encourage the use of African languages and Creole. We use also gender inclusive writing, which is very complicated in French, but it's so important for us. We support decolonial writers from all over the world. For instance, we are working now on a book. It's a decolonial critique of Haitian schooling. And we will also publish very soon a book called a Decolonial Dictionary, presenting as a dictionary the theory of decoloniality from Latin America. And we have recently published and the first anthology in French of Orlando Falsborda, the pioneer of participatory research action in Colombia. It's called Decolonizing Social Science. All our edited volumes by Global North authors must include authors from the Global South. So we pressure them, but it's not difficult. And we privilege multidisciplinary books or monograph. For example, we have published a book called If Scientific Research Could Not Be Neutral, which brings together perspectives from mathematics, museology, philosophy, anthropology, education science, and so on. Open access for us is fundamental because it gives access to our books all over the world, as long, of course, as people have internet access. We use Pressbooks as our software, which is an open source system, which produces a website for each book or journal, but also generates beautiful PDFs that can be printed, which is still very important in Africa. Our books are mainly downloaded from the Zenodo platform. And for instance, our book, Decolonizing Social Sciences, has been downloaded 430 times since Christmas. Well, for the funding, you may be wondering how we fund all that. Well, we are totally independent from anything. We receive no grants from governments or foundations or commercial funding. And we do not charge authors to publish their work. And this is my engagement. We refuse APCs. But most authors, they share our values, and authors, mainly from the Global North, manage to find grants for their books to be published. So it's either from their funding research or publication funds, or I don't know how, but they manage to find some money for us. And with the subsidy of these grants, it enables us to publish our book from the Global South. So I think I will stop here, and maybe you could ask me a question about our difficulties later.
Thanks, Florence. Over to you, Simi.
Okay, thank you, Ram. And hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. So as Ram said, I am an academic based at the LSE, but I am also a member of the editorial collective of Feminist Africa, and also of Feminist Theory, which is a northern-based journal. But Feminist Africa, as the name implies, is an African feminist journal. I've been on the editorial team of Feminist Africa since I was a master's student, since 2006, so quite a while now. And I've had the opportunity to kind of participate in different aspects of the production of that journal. At a certain point, I was the book reviews editor. Now I'm just a member of the collective. In the past, I've done copy editing for the journal and so on. So I'm going to mostly speak about Feminist Africa in my brief remarks this afternoon. So the first thing that I would say about the journal is that to Feminist Africa, I believe the first issue was published in 2002 or 2001. So, it's been going for about 20 years now. And right from inception, it was and it remains an open access journal. So I think, 2002, in that being published in the African context, I think in many ways it was actually ahead of its time in terms of being open access. And certainly the reasons why the journal was, and again, remains open access, I think similar to what Florence was just saying, it's very much about, it's very much to enable, the kind of the people who we consider to be our core kind of audience and constituents, and also authors, to have access to the journal and to the knowledge that the journal contains and produces. And that's primarily feminists and other scholars and activists and students in the African context, where, as you can imagine, and as you know, there are all kinds of very kind of high structural barriers to access to academic knowledge, academic and other knowledge. So, you know, having this open access journal again was so that the people who we really sort of wanted to be speaking to and who are also very much our contributors could have this space. The other thing, some of the other kind of aspects of our editorial kind of policy and commitments that I think kind of reflect a kind of decolonial, our decolonial politics include that, you know, again, from the inception, the journal has been very much, the emphasis has been very much on publishing African and again, feminist scholars who are located in Africa and located in African institutions, and also people who are not necessarily academics in the traditional sort of sense. So, you know, there's been very much, we very much tried to, I suppose, support and encourage, in terms of academics, as I said, academics who are in African institutions, who, you know, by definition are in, you know, less well-funded institutions than obviously their counterparts in the North. You know, so we, with our different issues, we very much kind of look for authors who are based there. It's not to say that we don't publish other people, but that if you look at who we publish, it is mostly people in those institutions. And then the other thing is, in terms of our editorial approach, is that we have taken in the past, you know, we've sort of had a view of like development editing. So essentially, as and when needed, helping our authors to kind of to develop their work and, you know, to get to a point where it's publishable. The other things about Feminist Africa is that we haven't done this, but well, at least not to my knowledge, but it's a conversation that we have and that we certainly want to do, is also to think about having training opportunities. So whether it's training in academic writing, you know, so kind of like writing workshops, editing workshops, and those kinds of things, again, to kind of build capacity of African feminist scholars and activists. The other things that I think are important in terms of what we publish, so Feminist Africa, I mean, I suppose, you know, we publish kind of, we publish traditional, what might be considered traditional academic articles, but actually in any given issue of Feminist Africa, actually the kind of, again, the conventional academic articles actually tend to be in the minority. You know, so typically we have 3 or 4 what we call feature articles, which are, you know, research-led, peer-reviewed, again, conventional kind of academic publishing. But then around, in addition to that and around that, we also publish and encourage different kinds of formats. And so in particular, we have standpoint pieces. So those are typically shorter pieces. They might be more kind of, you know, they're more reflective pieces. They might be more experimental pieces in terms of both their content, but also their style. We also have a section called In Conversation. So where we have, you know, so it's an interview type format or a conversation type format between different people. We also very much encourage and are interested in publishing or including activist perspectives. So again, not just kind of strictly or conventionally academic voices and styles, but, you know, very much sort of trying to engage with, again, with African feminist activist community and perspectives, which, I mean, obviously intersects with the African feminist scholarly community as well. And then the other thing is that we also, I mean, we are an interdisciplinary journal, you know, so we don't kind of hew to disciplinary boundaries and conventions in terms of what we publish and in terms of the kinds of conversations that we have within the space of the journal. In terms of funding, well, two things I would say. So similar to what Florence was saying, you know, we very much, over the years, we have had interest from different corporate publishers, academic publishers, you know, essentially wanting to kind of come in and, you know, take over the journal and offer support and offer the kinds of resources that they have, which frankly we need, you know, in terms of like the back end of the journal production, but we have always resisted that. So the journal is very much driven, but then in terms of funding, we do have and we do pursue grant funding, and, you know, that's the only way we can kind of stay afloat, as I see it anyway. But so the journal, in terms of the kind of the sheer labor that sustains the journal, you know, it's very much kind of driven by the commitments. I mean, obviously this goes for all journals, even journals that do have the kind of corporate and institutional backing. You know, it is very much about the kind of intellectual and political energies of the people who are kind of doing the day-to-day work. But in the case of Feminist Africa, as I said, we don't We have had, and we do have institutional affiliation with universities. So initially, when the journal started, for maybe about 15 years, it was housed at the Africa Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town. And then in the last 2-3 years, we moved to the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. So there is, university institutional affiliation, but certainly in terms of editorial support and the editorial structures and so on, the journal has been driven and has been kept alive by the sheer and immense labor of the community of scholars and activists who produce it. I think that's all I'll say for now.
Thanks, Simi. Next, we'll listen to Godwin. So over to you, Godwin.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for organizing this event and for inviting myself and the entire East African Literary and Cultural Studies Journal to share our experiences. Now, perhaps before I delve into details of how we operate or how we began, I just wish to say that the Journal of East African Literary and Cultural Studies began in 2013 at the University of Nairobi, and it was co-founded by Tom Odhiambo and myself. And over the years, we've survived to continue publishing 4 issues in a year. And currently, the editorial collective constitutes Dina Ligaga from Wits University, as well as Professor Tina Steiner from Stellenbosch, Linda Spencer from Broad University, and all these are in South Africa. And lastly, myself, who is still based at the University of Nairobi. Primarily, as the introduction said, we focus largely on the traditional journal articles, but these are interspersed with interviews, sometimes book reviews, as well as personal reflections or what one may choose to call polemical pieces. Now, we've organized this around a series of special issues, at least 2 per year, and open issues of at least 2 per year. And over the years, since 2014, with the exception of 1 year, we've sort of managed to have all the 4 issues out every year, courtesy of the very strong support that we get from Tel and Francis. Now, the journal, as some of us may be aware, is virtually, I think, the first journal to enjoy the kind of circulation and infrastructural support that Tel and Francis offers in this region, partly because, as my predecessor just observed, the sense in which the academy in Africa and in East Africa specifically is organized is such that there's a lot of financial and other forms of infrastructural deprivation, which makes sustaining a journal such a tall order. However, with the support of Tel and Francis, and of course with the labor of love that has been extended by the editorial collective, we've managed to sustain the journal, both in terms of the scope of raising to higher visibility literary and cultural scholarship from Eastern Africa and Africa at large, but also in terms of ensuring that the conversation does not stall at some point. Now, in terms of how we position ourselves relative to the prevailing global issues, we talk about innovative ways of publishing that allows us, first of all, to raise to visibility forms of knowledge production that are based in the region, but also in addressing some of the issues that have accounted for or led to the seeming invisibility of these regions. And I'm talking about, for example, the politics of language in terms of, or in the business of journal publication. That I think one of the most recognizable things that we've done in the recent past is to organize the first ever bilingual issue, where we have Kiswahili articles published side by side and simultaneously with their English translations in the same journal. And this was done in collaboration with a guest editor by way of Professor Ken Walibora, who oversaw the first ever such a project. And one way of also ensuring that this is made even more visible to the rest of the world is that by their generosity, I think, or ideological strategy, Taylor and Francis has made this journal, this special issue, freely accessible to all scholars who may be interested in that. And this has been running for a while. I suppose it should be freely accessible up to the end of February. So I think the reality is that journal publishing from an East African or even from an African perspective is one that is fraught with many challenges. Some of them are historical, others are institutional and structural, and others are just even cultural or traditional, if you like. And that has meant that for quite some time now, the challenges that afflict journal publishing means that all the misconceptions about journal hierarchies, for example, when we talk about the high impact journals and the low impact journals, where the second category is associated with the global south, then we see that these challenges tend to somehow, and even if unfortunately, extend the same narrative. So at the end of it all, then we are saying that in East African literary and cultural studies, we are trying to undo the damage that has been wreaked by these realities. As I've mentioned, one way of dealing with that problem is how, for example, we make available some of our issues freely accessible using various mechanisms that exist within the journal circulation channels in Africa, as well as in the rest of the world. We have also done the translation where we are reversing the order of translation from English into Kiswahili or any other African languages, but rather now from Kiswahili into English, because we believe that there's a lot of scholarship that has happened and that continues to take place in the region and which gets lost to the rest of the world because it's packaged in Kiswahili, which unfortunately, like many other African and other non-European languages, these are not associated broadly with the business of knowledge production. So we leverage on the partnership that we have with Taylor and Francis, for example, as well as with our other ideologically inclined partners to make sure that we not only publish the journal regularly, but we also advance the agenda of verifying for greater visibility perspectives that originate more precisely from Eastern Africa and Africa in general. As my predecessor has said, one of the other things that we've also done is to partner with colleagues in institutions in the global north to run workshops that are used to induce or induct our junior scholars into the business of publishing in serious journals. And more recently, we've done this with the support of the British Academy, partnering with the University of Exeter and Bristol University to run a series of workshops in Dar es Salaam, in Kampala, in Nairobi, and I think the very last one was held in Hargeisa in Somaliland. As I turn towards the end, I think I also want to talk about the issue of how we redefine priority areas. The fact is that for as long as publishing relies so much on the beacons erected by our colleagues in the global north, the issue of value and the issue of what constitutes contemporary research tends to fall beyond the influence of scholars who are based in the region. So part of what we've done as a journal is to ensure that we focus on those intellectual or literary and cultural blind spots to bring to greater visibility areas that would otherwise not pass in terms of meet or fitting in the tradition of publications that exist elsewhere. And this is not to say that we go easy on, of course, the rigors of peer review and things like those. It is just that we tend to broaden the scope sufficiently to accommodate literary and cultural innovations that happen in the region. For example, the recent trend in literary festivals, which not always get admission into the publishing spaces in the global north, but which will give some space in our journal to let the world know what is happening. And very lastly, I think one of the challenges that we have to grapple with is the challenge of recognition and the politics of accreditation. We realize that a number of our colleagues who would wish to publish with us are based in institutions where they attract some dividends or credit points if they publish in what are called the accredited journals. Some of these colleagues in Southern African universities and in other universities in Europe, for example, are willing to support us by way of publishing with us, but they are quite keen on the process of accreditation. And massively or luckily, the journal has recently been accredited by the Department of Higher Education and Training in South Africa. And so we are well placed to attract some perspectives from our colleagues who are based in South Africa, as well as in Europe. Yeah, so I think that is just about it for now, but I'll be happy to share more details during the Q&A. Thank you, Ram.
Thanks, Godwin. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, hello everyone, and like my predecessors, thank you again for inviting me to participate in this webinar this afternoon. Okay, so from the publisher's perspective then, I think we're at the point where we do need to make fundamental shifts in the way that we have worked traditionally, and we are attempting to tangibly address some of the structures which colleagues on the panel have highlighted are unrepresentative and inaccessible. Certainly the area studies group and wider humanities and social sciences team at Taylor and Francis that I am part of are proactively grappling with the need for equity, diversity, beyond that decolonisation. As we know, universities and other institutes that are also involved in the publishing ecosystem are. I think it must be a wholesale endeavour across all stakeholders involved in producing research. But I would say that publishers certainly have a significant part to play. We are inextricably linked in some of these processes that we've been talking about. And my experience is that the publisher input has been welcomed by the academics, by other colleagues that we've worked with over the years. Regarding the area studies portfolio that I'm responsible for, I would say these issues firstly manifest themselves as issues of access or consumption of research. And on that front, I would say there are mechanisms in place. The challenge is ensuring that they are known about and that the people who need to get access can benefit from the mechanisms which are in place. So on that front, for example, our ongoing partnership with Research for Life helps address inequalities in readership. For those of you or anyone on the webinar who aren't aware, Research for Life provides free or low cost access to peer-reviewed research in low and middle income countries. We've partnered with Research for Life for several years now, but back in 2019, we took the decision to include our entire portfolio in that programme, including all the African studies titles that we publish, both those published out of Africa and in the UK. When it comes to individual researchers, because not everyone is affiliated with the classic research institution, our STAR programme, that stands for Special Terms for Authors and Researchers, provides access for those independents. So as I say, some mechanisms are in place, but the challenge and the conversations that I'm involved with at the moment are around ensuring that those mechanisms are known about and that, as I say, the people who need to get this access can get the access. Although access isn't, in and of itself, the desired outcome, it's part of the cycle, I suppose, that we're talking about. Beyond access, I think for us, decolonisation focuses on the production of area studies scholarship, and particularly in area studies that has a resonance given the roots of the discipline. And I would say that's the focus we have in our team. It's a key aspect of our objectives, quite literally. Has been for several years. We started with, I think in the brief we called it the low-hanging fruit. Started looking at this as a team back in 2018, collecting data on editorial board composition. We set up some Raising Global Voices workshops, which were held in London and Dar es Salaam. to discuss these issues with our collaborators. But it's grown from there to the point that we know these workshops aren't enough in and of themselves. The ethical practice needs to be embedded in the structures, in how we work. And I would say that at present this takes the form of project work, data analysis, surveys that we produce and put out to the communities that we work with. Obviously conversations with our Taylor and Francis colleagues in Africa and Asia, globally, in fact. So, we are sensitizing partners where we need to do so. That's not always the case. Sometimes they come to us first. Engaging in critical dialogue. And I think picking up on what Florence and others said earlier, experimenting, engaging in novel approaches to publishing. We've got a way to go in terms of diversity of boards, authorship and peer reviewers. But I think one of the interesting ways that we're starting to try and tackle these issues is looking at publishing new formats beyond the standard research article. To give you a concrete example of that, a recent partnership between F1000 Research, which is the open access arm of Taylor and Francis, and the African Academy of Sciences, enables the open publication of a broad range of research outputs beyond the article. So any format, in fact, and that's something that we are looking to expand. One of the clear advantages there, obviously, is the authors themselves, based in Africa, and not editors, not your typical traditional editorial board, for example, decide when to publish and what to publish. So we're not there yet, but that is one example, as well as the Kiswahili special issue, which Godwin mentioned, published in Eastern African Literary and Cultural Studies. Some years ago now, we also published some articles in Gikuyu and Yoruba in the Journal of African Cultural Studies as well. So just to pick up on the politics of language that I think Godwin raised, that's something which we are also looking to continue. I'm not too keen on the word experimentation, actually, but that we're looking to expand or grow. So all of this is to say that I think there is a role for publishers to play. We're necessary in influencing the discussions, certainly in information sharing, in promoting conversations across the interdisciplinary portfolio that we work on, and between, for example, communities working in African studies and, for example, Latin American studies, or any other different sub-segments, if you like, of area studies where those conversations may or may not be happening already. I think there's a role, particularly when it comes to the need for data, which can support editorial decision making, and for, as I say, experimentation, if you like, with new publishing models. But particularly, it's important, I think, now to focus on the needs of researchers and how we might serve those in future, rather than as publishers endorsing the sort of continued fixation with the article and its associated processes. So like any other industry, we're not immune to bias. And I think there is a responsibility there for us to continually review, how it is we are publishing the research that we publish. So, yeah, thank you. And I'll stop there, perhaps until there's some Q&A interaction.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Maybe I could just do a quick one round of questions, and we'll see if we get more questions after that. Then I can switch over to the Q&A, or I can keep another round of questions. So I think we got a broad kind of spectrum of responses. And I'm trying to think of something which you can all answer or respond to from your own perspective. One thing which I think all of you are trying to do in your own ways to address the politics of language. But for me, the question is, how do you engage critically with the question of quality or relevance to research? Because at some point, that is what is distinguishing you from other kinds of publishing, right? So how do you address that tension? So maybe we can just have a round of responses, and then I can look at the other questions that has come from the audience. Yeah, we can take the same order. So maybe we can start with Florence, and yeah. You're on mute, Florence, sorry. Okay, so some issue. So maybe Simi can go first.
Yeah, sorry, can you say the question again?
I was just wondering, like, how in your respective work you try to engage with this tension of what is worth publishing, what is the issue of quality, especially when it comes to language, because language changes the way we think, it changes meaning. So how do you try to maintain a sense of what makes you different from other kinds of publishing? So clearly, when you call yourself an academic publishing initiative, how do you address questions of quality is my question. Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that I didn't say, which is actually quite key, which is that Feminist Africa, in our, almost 20 years now, we only publish themed issues that are guest edited. So we don't have open calls for submissions. So every issue has a guest editor that kind of conceptualizes the issue, and I mean there is subsequently an open call, but as I said, it's for a theme. But often the guest editor also, and I mean I've guest edited an issue, so if I can speak from my experience of doing that, I mean part of the process is very much about kind of I suppose we have an open call, but also kind of identifying the kinds of people who are doing the sort of work that we, working around the theme and being in touch and in conversation with them. And then, as I said, I mean, so both the guest editor, but also the editorial team more broadly, also then kind of working with the submissions that we get. And I think, I mean, in my experience, as I said, I'm also on the board of feminist, on the team of feminist theory, although I haven't been there, I've been there maybe just over a year. So if I just, it's not very long, but if I compare the experience thus far, I would say that the editorial kind of intervention, if you want to use that word, that I think Feminist Africa does, and the editorial support that it offers, editorial and intellectual support that we offer to our authors and the people who are submitting work to us, I think is a lot more intense than probably the more kind of conventional journals might offer. So both the guest editor, but also the team more broadly do, depending on the nature of the piece, and certainly in my direct experience as a guest editor, there was a kind of intensive back and forth, not with all the editors, but with all the authors, but some, to kind of, in response to the peer review, but even before the peer review, and then also, after the revisions and so on, to kind of continue working on the piece, I suppose. And addressing, whatever the issues are that we might see in the piece, to kind of, to meet a standard. I recognize there's a question, obviously, about what it means for things to say that things are publishable in the first place. That obviously is in itself is a highly kind of problematic kind of frame and concept. Just a quick, so this is not directly on this question, but if I may just quickly say on the question of language, so I think both Florence and Godwin spoke about, the different kind of translation projects that they have. And that sort of, made me think about Feminist Africa. And what I would say just very quickly is that on the one hand, Feminist Africa is in English, we publish in English only. And so far, one of the challenges that we've had, but it's a challenge that we recognize and we have in various ways tried to address, is the question of where our authors are, institutionally and also linguistically. So basically, overwhelmingly, the people who submit to us are precisely English speaking. So there is a recognition within the journal, and you can see it in terms of who's published there, that we don't have, our links are not, the linguistic barriers basically on the continent are playing out in the journal in terms of who submits. So for instance, to the best of my knowledge, there's one piece that we had in 2008 that was translated from French. I'm not sure if you've ever had another translation like that, actually, off the top of my head. And then not to mention, the non-English speaking other languages that are spoken on the African continent. And then at the moment, we actually have a project to translate some of our key past pieces. But not incidentally, tellingly, at the moment, the project is translating it's French, Portuguese, and so on. So it's not about translating into indigenous languages, but rather into the other kind of dominant imperial languages that are spoken in Africa.
Thanks, Simi.
I'm
Florence?
sorry. I'm sorry. My computer crashed. I had to start it again. Very sorry.
No
So your question was about translation?
Translation, but more broadly, how do you address or engage with questions of quality, and especially because academic publishing, that's a big question, right? What makes it to the standard? Yeah, so
yes.
that's the point, yeah.
We have imagined creative ways of peer reviewing for some of our books, but for our journals, we are working very closely with the DOAJ, Directory of Open Access Journals, which is a fantastic repertoire, website.
Repository, yeah.
Yes, and they have a lot of criteria for quality. And we are very attentive to respect all those criteria. In fact, I work very closely with the editor-in-chief of the DOAJ because he wants to have more African journals. I hope that Godwin has registered his journal in the DOAJ because it's a really very useful platform, and Feminist Africa too. And they are really the most international repository that I know of. They have now 15,000 open access journals. Well, for me, only open access journal exists. I'm sorry. I am so against, for-profit publishing that I don't even consider these journals as existing. And I've never published in a for-profit journal. I'm sorry about that, Elizabeth, but Ram, if you allow me, I wanted to take on Elizabeth about what she said about Research for Life. I think that Research for Life, for me, is the epitome, you understand that? Epitome, the summum of colonial publishing. So I'm very surprised that you talked about it in a decolonial panel, because Research for Life is a database of journals that are chosen, by publishers from the North, and they are sort of given as a generous gift, to small libraries in African countries. And I can tell you, I've been to the library in Burkina Faso University, and I saw two computers in the middle of a room. And the librarian told me, these are the computers from Research for Life. They are so not open access that they change the password every month, and we have lost the count. So the computers are there, but no one is able to use it. So they completely abandon Research for Life. And they told me they cannot choose which journal are in Research for Life. So for me, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, but I'm very against Research for Life. And what I want is all journals to be open access so that each librarian is able to choose the journals that they want to offer to their students. And not this, it's like, condescending. So for me, it's a colonial project, Research for Life. Sorry about that. I'm an activist,
Thanks, Florence. You've raised the issue
Would
of
you
the
like me
political
to
economy, but
respond, or should we let
sure.
Godwin speak first?
Maybe Elizabeth
however
can
you
respond.
prefer.
Yeah, Elizabeth, why don't you respond? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Florence. I appreciate the point that you are making there. And yeah, I can understand that if you've had a particular experience where you've been, in a university library, in an institution, and for whatever reason, the access hasn't been available, I can understand why you would feel that way. I think for us, we saw this perhaps incorrectly, but I like to think that the intentions were good, as a way of enabling access to others to others, to scholars, institutions who would not otherwise have been able to have access. I think we are moving increasingly towards an open access world across research publishing, both in the humanities, social sciences and the scientific subjects. I would say that open access, there are challenges there in the humanities and social sciences that are perhaps not there with scientific research. But I think for us, we are trying to sort of straddle different models while different research communities globally are moving towards open access. And, we're on that pathway to transition at the moment. So, we are looking at ways where, frankly, no researcher or research community is unable to publish their research with us, whether that's through open access publishing via the F1000 open access arm at Taylor & Francis, or whether that's through one of the hybrid journals that Florence at the moment, obviously you are not in favour of. But I think the key point here is flexibility as the different communities move at different speeds towards open access. Not everyone is there yet. Not everyone has that grant funding that we spoke about earlier. And for us, I think, our very clearly stated goal this year is that, no researcher is in a position where they are unable to publish their research with Taylor & Francis if they wish to do so. And that is enabled, through a range of different mechanisms, different policies and different products. So yeah, I'll stop there again, just to let others come in if they want to.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think we have a lot of questions, so it's heating up a little bit. So Godwin, if that's okay, we can go directly to the Q&A, and then maybe you can address some of the things in the Q&A question. One of the questions is also looking at the gender, how this whole thing is gendered. So there's a question from about, could you say something about the ability of women writers to have their work published? I've heard that women in some countries face the added hurdle of needing a man to sign their publishing contracts. And any ideas about ways in which academic libraries in the US can contribute to improving the situation? This is from Gwen Spieth, who's the library worker in acquisition cataloging of African monographs at Harvard Library in Cambridge. Anyone like to respond to that quickly?
I didn't really understand, but I want to say that we use only Creative Commons license. So the matter of contracting for us is not a subject. All the works that we published are under Creative Commons license. It's very easier to work in that environment.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, let me just jump in on that note and say also that for us, the copyright rests with the author, so we don't try to take rights. In terms of Gwen's question, I personally am not familiar with this idea that women need a man to sign their publishing contracts. I don't know anything about that. I don't know if that's true. I don't think so. I hope not. Sorry, I know this is not the question, but just to still go back to the, I see there's a question about this later, which I just agree with. This, as a comment, Risa says, that again, the idea, exactly as Florence said, the idea that, that external actors select what we, let's say, now, I'm not in Africa at the moment myself, but that would select what people in low income and, less resource institutions can access and what they might like and what they might need, I think is a very paternalist framework. And I think it's very problematic. And frankly, notions of hybrid journals and so on, for me, I think the bottom line, and again, I think Florence said this, is that they need to be open access. And in terms of what is, one of the prompts that Ram, I think you sent initially, what are some of the problems with academic publishing? And this is not even about the Global South specifically. Even in the North, we're having these conversations, and I think academics are increasingly fed up. I personally am increasingly fed up with the model, where as the academics, from the authors to the peer reviews to the editorial boards and so on, that you do all this labor and then it gets captured by these big corporate institutions and put behind these paywalls. It's a problem even for northern northern-based scholars who do have institutional resources and funding and so on, that we can't access a lot of knowledge for free, you know. And that also that all the work that we do, as I said, that it gets monetized by other people. It's a big problem. The model is completely flawed. And I think as academics, both North and South, we need to put our foot down.
Ram, if you may, I want to pitch in at that point and maybe comment on the issue of open access. I think for our journal, the matter has been slightly different in terms of determining what is made available for the public and what isn't, because these are decisions that have been made exclusively by the editorial collective. Previously, our focus has been on determining what in our own view, or rather selecting what in our own view constitutes the most influential piece that has been published in the past 1 year or so. And even now, as we've made the special bilingual issue open access up to the end of February, it's a decision that was largely taken by the editorial collective and supported fully by Tel and Francis. I think what we are talking about is really a complex issue in terms of the role of capital in knowledge production, because from where we are based in Eastern Africa, the traditions of publishing regular academic journals have always been thwarted by the reality that it's not always possible to secure funding for that. And so, whereas somebody may want to have a regular journal publication regime, that reality also has to be borne in mind. And if we can get, for example, a healthy partnership that is not patronizing, that is not paternalistic, then that is the model that I think works. So far, in answer to the questions about the gendered nature of publication, again, in our journal, we have the editorial independence, and that independence is both at the policy, at the ideological, as well as at the decisional level. That once a journal article goes through the mandatory peer review process, a decision to publish or not to publish is made solely on the quality of the article itself and not on the name of the author, whether it's a man or woman. And so I think, like Simi, I'm also hearing about that for the first time. And Ram, if you just allow me to say something about how we assure our quality, there are 3 ways that are interrelated. First of all, the regular double-blind peer review process, but also we've had to rely extensively on special issues that are edited or guest edited by established scholars. As we speak currently, we have a special issue that is just coming out, guest edited by Madhu Krishnan from Bristol University, whose academic standing, of course, a record speaks for itself. And besides that, the journal has also been working in close collaboration with a conference series of the same name. That is the East African Literary and Cultural Studies conference series, which has been running biannually. And what we've done regularly has been to target some of those papers that are presented at the conference. And once those papers are given collegial feedback, then we encourage others to develop them into publishable pieces. And that has been one way of ensuring that the quality issue is addressed, even as we also address the issue of publication in the context of language politics. And lastly, as I mentioned in my earlier presentation, the practice that we've put in place of writing clinics where we induct young academics into the culture of academic writing has also played a significant role in ensuring that the quality is assured, because again, the issue is related that many of our students who emerge out of universities in this region sort of are faced with what one may call a stage fright that does not prepare them adequately for the business of journal or academic article publishing. So we put in place all these mechanisms as and when necessary to ensure that the quality is assured. So.
Thanks. Yeah, Elizabeth, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, please. Yeah, I mean, I think the question about quality and rigor, well, they themselves are sort of loaded and charged in terms of, you know, who determines what is quality. But I think, you know, that's an important point, and actually it sort of sits in conjunction with the matter of open access, actually, because, you know, even if in an ideal world, you know, all of the articles, monographs and so on were to be made open access, I mean, fundamentally, if what we're talking about is an issue whereby most of the authors, most of the contributors and so on that are publishing those works are from the so-called global north, and they are not in and of themselves representative, then, and, you know, making those materials open access won't actually solve the problem at heart either. You know, in and of itself, it's got to be to the entire ecosystem, I would say. I noted also that there's a question in the Q&A from Cara regarding how do we know peer review is actually being done. So we would ask that, you know, records of all peer review are kept quite simply by the editorial team. You know, the publisher doesn't intervene in that peer review process in the sense that they don't have a say on what is actually published in the end. You know, but the peer review process should obviously be happening, and peer review should be retained. And in response to the question, what are the Taylor and Francis mechanisms for complaint and transparency on rejected articles? There is a process. I can actually type the link into the chat, which I'll do in a moment, so that's clear for everyone. And essentially, as a member of the Committee on Publication Ethics, COPE for short, that's the acronym. That's the, you know, that's the committee that we're a member of, and it's their guidelines that we would follow if there were to be any complaints about rejected articles specifically. But I will type the answer into the chat for Cara.
Okay, thanks everyone. I think obviously the issues of quality is intimately connected to the political economy of the academic publishing. And there are a bunch of follow-up questions, but I do want to give the other kind of questions a little bit of time for you to respond to. But it would be great if we can have a follow-up session at some point to look into the open access, because open access also, I believe, which is in effect from the UK from 2012, hasn't really fundamentally addressed the problems also. So I think this warrants a deeper kind of inquiry. Just coming to a couple of the other questions, there is an interesting question from Leanne Sequeira about why Global South journal articles accompanied by the name of the country always. So wherever there is a Global South article, there's always the name of the place. But in the West, if there's anything, it's always universalized. So what are the journals doing to reverse this trend is the question. A very brief, quick answer from all of you, please.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say we don't do that in Feminist Africa, but I'm going to have to quickly check. But I mean, yes, it's a good point. You know, I mean, it's a problem. And just to say, I mean, it's not about journals, but in just a quick example, in reference to my book, you know, there was a conversation with the publisher, who is a US university publisher, about, look, you know, that thing about locating it. It's about Nigeria, so put Nigeria in the title in a way that, as you said, if it's a book about London or the UK or whatever, you can just say it's about whatever it is, fashion, and that's it. You don't have to specify. You know, so some of us are marked and have to mark ourselves.
Godwin or Elizabeth, one of you, or Florence, quick responses?
No, we don't do that at all. But we ask each author to write their own biography in French, and it's in their own language, if possible. And so they are free to define themselves as they are. But I think it's very important to humanize the articles or the books, to have an idea of who the author is. So for me, the bios, we don't just put, you know, the name of the author, the university, and the country. We always add a short paragraph written by the author about their life and who they are.
Thanks. Godwin or Elizabeth, any quick response?
I could just very briefly add that, yeah, the Taylor and Francis policy is effectively that the author is free to, you know, decide what should be stated as their affiliation. That's the policy across all the journals. So, you know, they should be able to indicate locality as they wish, effectively.
Right. I'm looking at the other questions because I do want to see if there's anything. There seems to be a couple of questions coming back to the open access issue. So there is a comment about predatory open access journals. So it's a slightly different interpretation of quality. So the comment here is that the problem that the top journals, quote unquote top journals, tend to have very little transparency and tend to promote particular approaches, and also the citation of particular authors overwhelmingly from the North or even specifically from the US. So this is also the broader citational politics. So any responses to that?
Yes, well, these are two different questions. About the citations of authors from the North, it is a deeply colonial phenomenon. And when I go to Africa and discuss with students in Francophone Africa, which I've done a lot, they really explain to me that they are obliged to cite French authors. If not, their work is not considered as of good quality. If they cite only African scholars, they are frightened to have bad grades. And so I encourage them, and sometimes it's not difficult for them to change their minds. But it's not a matter of publishing. It's really the way that the students are taught in universities. And for instance, in sociology, it's always Bourdieu, Weber, Foucault. Even, you know, once I reviewed a paper from Cameroon about women working in factories in the north of Cameroon. And the main theoretical reference was a paper from a sociologist in Paris about factories there. I said, wow, this is not acceptable. There's no relationship between women, Muslim women in northern Cameroon and what's happening in Paris. And so this is a real deeply decolonial fight to open, but it's more at the level of the teaching in universities. And regarding open access, I think someone in the Q&R said it's really a matter of money. I'm sorry, but Taylor and Francis is a for-profit industry. Elizabeth told that industry. And our non-for-profit little publishing house, for us, it's not industry, it's a service that we give to the scholars from especially Africa, Francophone Africa, to help them publish. And we don't go with established, you know, we try to help young scholars to publish, even scholars who don't have a position yet and so on. So our journals are mainly driven by editorial boards with very junior researchers, but they are so enthusiastic. And open access, because for Taylor and Francis, open access is with APCs. It's making the author pay. And it's a fundamental problem for the Global South, especially Francophone Africa, where there are no grant money. In the Global North, we use our grant money to pay for the APCs, not our personal money. In Francophone Africa, they use their personal money. So it's a fundamental injustice. So open access should have a very different meaning, contextualized meaning in the Global North and in the Global South.
On the question of open access, there is a question that obviously Florence has put her views very clearly, but if there are other views on what the best business model for open access that would be fair for all researchers, not just those in the global north. If you have any views, I think that we'll have to close with that. So final round of responses for what kind of model do you really think for open access would work? Yeah, Godwin, please.
Thank you. Sorry, colleagues, I went out for a moment. The issue of open access, I think, as it is emerging now, is a highly contentious issue. But my suggestion is that it's also something that is inflected by, or actually influenced by, the specific location from which one speaks. I speak from a university in East Africa that has struggled to even get a journal up and running. And the problem has always been to get the second issue out, because after all the energy and enthusiasm, one can actually get the first issue out, but then the continuity becomes a challenge because of financial, logistical, technical, and other forms of problems. So it is at this point then that we have to ride on the goodwill and support of colleagues from other parts of the world. And sometimes it happens that it's an industry such as Dell and Francis, if I'm to borrow the phrase used by one of our colleagues. But even as an editorial collective, we are aware of the political economy that informs some of these partnerships. And we are also aware of how to ensure that our voice or voices from this region, both as editors and as academics, somehow find their way to our colleagues who are situated elsewhere. I'm saying this in response to a question, I think that was posed by Sandra Brown, in terms of how we, from our current location, ensure that our intellectual agenda is not unduly influenced by our colleagues from Europe. And as I suggested earlier, it is an issue of vigorously defending our editorial independence at the collective level and also at the individual decisional level. And that is also related to the issue of determining what our partners, Taylor and Francis, leave to be open access and for how long, because that in a way helps us to sort of set the agenda of the kind of debates that we want to push out to the regional publics and things like those. I was also quite intrigued by, actually, I was very happy, excited by the question posed by Amina Mama on the issue of quality control. And I think that it's an issue that keeps arising. I want to imagine everywhere. Although in our own region, we are also quite happy to push the agenda of quality control, because we are quite aware that the recent corporatization of the university has led to a situation where the whole range of what has been uncharitably called predatory journals are wreaking havoc on the business of academic writing and academic publishing. So in as much as we are apprehensive about the dynamics that underpin debates or concerns with quality control, we are also aware of the slippery slope that is when it comes to considering what is publishable and what is not. And I guess that is my way of saying that it doesn't really matter the grammar or the vocabulary that we use, but the issue of quality control will always come up in one form or the other. And lastly, to answer your question, Amina Mama, once again, we are supporting young academics by putting in place, with our colleagues and within the existing structures, support mechanisms that include writing workshops, that include the conference series. For example, our journal, East African Literary and Cultural Studies, has worked closely with the East African Literary and Cultural Studies Conference Series, which has determined to organize international conferences that are based within universities in East Africa. And so far, we've done 4 of those at the University of Nairobi, University of Makerere, University of Dar es Salaam, And last year, 2019, or year before last, we went to Ethiopia at Bahir Dar and Lalibela, so that people can actually insert themselves in the circuits of academic discourse without having to suffer the bureaucracies and other challenges that people face when they have to travel to Europe for those kinds of conferences.
Godwin, I'm afraid I have to cut because I think we've kind of run out of time. But thanks for your points. I think also you have mentioned all of this in your initial presentation as well. I mean, there are plenty of other questions, but unfortunately we have run out of time. But I really hope that we can take some of these discussions, some of these questions, also talking about decolonization in a broader sense. I appreciate that this is a lot of the discussions were about Africa, but I do think we need to look at it in a much broader sense and also see how much we can think about whether some kind of incremental reform is possible within the conceptual category of decolonization, or a more abolitionist or more radical kind of approach is asked for. So that's also another question, but I hope that we can pursue all of this in another session which the center will organize. But thank you all for coming, and thanks to the panelists. I really think it was a very, very stimulating session, and I really hope that we can have more of it. So thank you, and thanks for participating.
Can I just say one quick thing? One quick global thing, which is, I think, one thing, I mean, it's coming through in some of the questions in terms of model. Part of the problem, I mean, as somebody put it there, part of the, it's the corporatization of knowledge and of the universities and of education in general, and so that's part of the problem. And that, if anything, that's actually probably the root of the problem. And so where we need to push back. So, in terms of questions of how would open access be funded, how would it work, and so on, it's precisely about having public funding of knowledge production and of education and of teaching and so on, as opposed to these kind of more private and hybrid models that we have.
Yeah, if I could jump in there and agree with that, actually, I think that speaks to the point that I said at the beginning of the 5-minute slot that I had, which is this is not going to be solved single-handedly necessarily, by publishers themselves. I think this is going to take a collective effort, among researchers, institutions, publishers together.
Thank you. Thanks.
And I think that universities must regain power on publication, especially libraries. We don't need for-profit actors in publication.
Good radical note to end on. Thank you all. Kojo, I think we have to close, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This was an excellent talk, and I think we uncovered a lot. The event will be recorded and shared on YouTube, so do check back for that. And thank you panelists and audience for joining us today, and everyone have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.